Greetings, fellow young people. Very pleased to be here today and to share a little bit of what I've experienced with this particular topic. I'm going to do what Joel did, and basically we'll have an informal session. It's just us girls, right? We're just going to talk a little bit, and we'll have the mics available. And if you've got a burning question, just get my attention, and we'll handle them as we go. Or if you want to wait till the end, that's all right with me too. Let's just conduct have a little chat. This is a little bit about me, as has been previously been introduced, and not anything very interesting about that. This is a different kind of maturity model. I actually like this one a little better because it supports the continual learning model. Is it basically once you achieve a particular state and begin moving forward, you're never really done with that. You have to periodically review it. You have to back up. You have an incident. You have a change in vendor. You have a change in policy. There's a merger and acquisition. The situation that you're trying to protect changes. And it doesn't change drastically, but it changes and needs refinement continually. So this model kind of captures that idea, as opposed to the stack pyramid or the stair-step sort of model. And these particular maturities that are singled out here are the ones from ISA 62443. And in general, they use more words to describe them, but the first one is basically what we would think of as the 101. And for the most part, we're going to jump past that. We're going to be emphasizing on particularly this second statement, is it the 201, where basically we've gotten past just getting security by accident or just whatever security the vendor ships, to actually thinking about what you're trying to protect and how you want to protect it, and writing that stuff down. And as we get beyond that, then we get a process that is consistent and that is repeatable, and ultimately you're managing it. You're managing it in that you've not only got it written down and you have that as expectations and fitness for use requirements as part of your entire life cycle for your process automation system. But you're also then taking metrics. You're actually looking to see how good a job that you're doing, and you're looking for places of weakness that you can improve. So that's the model that this represents. And I really like this model a lot. And I'm kind of biased toward the 62443 model. But there are lots of other ones. And if you liked other words here, if you liked words like identify and protect and detect and so on and so forth from the NIST model, go ahead and use those if that makes sense to you. But this is the kind of environment that we're talking about. And again, I like the waterfall aspect of that. So determining the security requirements for your system gets into what you're willing to document, the kind of things that you want to capture, that you want to have as a target, that you want to try to achieve. Typically, you don't just say it's a whole maturity. And matter of fact, you might be at different stages and different parts of these domains. But the domains almost every plant, almost every enterprise is going to have are listed here. And you might call them different things rather than architecture, but you've got to start with an architecture. Now, I've got to tell you, if you've not sat down and actually done a reference architecture model for your process automation systems, that's an ad hoc activity. That's a 101 kind of activity. And there's all kinds of times in which we've gone on site to do security assessments for process control systems or plants or a series of sites in which this particular key piece of documentation doesn't exist. And really, up to this point, you didn't have to have it to be able to make product. You didn't have to have it to make lots of class 1 product of whether it's polymer or power or clean water or whatever it is shipping. You didn't have to have this document to be able to do this, to get to this step. But the reference architecture gets to be critical. Otherwise, you're going to have a different one for each instance. Whoever the designer is, whoever the integrator are, they're going to guide this for you, as opposed to you basically setting the boundaries of your own, what you want, and you want to achieve in terms of security for your site, which has to be focused on whatever the mission objective is for your enterprise. Again, whether it's clean water, power, making polymer, making Twinkies, whatever it is, you've got to be focused on achieving that mission. And almost everything that you've got to do in security, there's lots of advice that's being given and good guidelines and such, but ultimately that's all got to reflect back on what you want, what you're trying to achieve in your enterprise. These are things that you've got to pay attention to in some form in these domains, things like your change management system and your backup strategies. These things are all going to be aspects of determining your maturity and setting your security program. And those are going to guide the requirements that you're going to face for your process automation system security. I'm going to refer to process automation system. I like the term industrial control system or process automation system just because I'm an old guy and that's what we've been calling them for years. But really, don't get wrapped around the axle and saying, I've got a building control system or I've got a SCADA system. I don't have an ICS, DCS. Don't let the terminology confuse you here. We're all talking about the same stuff. So when we start thinking about the security requirements, you need to start with the must-haves, the things that you absolutely have to be able to do to be able to keep the gates open and people employed. And some of those things are going to be by industry, things like NERC-CIP or CFATs for the chemical industry, or NIST if you're a government site. These things are going to be fixations. They're going to be things that you have to take into consideration. Your auditors will hold you accountable to them. Your customers, your clients, your suppliers, your partners are all going to hold you and expect you to be able to meet these things. And if you don't, you're doing it really at the risk of fines or being shut down. And taking those into account, you also have some that are by a municipality that determining where in the world that you're operating. They're different in North America than they are, say, in Australia, or maybe in the Middle East, or Europe. There are different sets of requirements that you have to take into account. You have to build into your security requirements, and these are non-negotiable. Non-negotiable, that's kind of tough. A lot of the must-haves here, and things like NERC-CIP, the companies I've seen that are really dominating here, and frankly, that the larger, better staffed companies, are the ones that look at these things and say, man, look at all the stuff we've got to do now. It's as if I don't have enough other things to do. But rather, they look at those requirements and they determine how they can enable them to do things they wanted to do anyway. They wanted to have a more secure data center. They wanted to have more control over the personnel that worked on their equipment. And they focus on those things and they lift those requirements out and they focus on them and interpret those requirements in a way that helps them to get things done that they wanted to do anyway. Those are the people that are really dominating and winning in this process. The folks that just simply see this as a bunch of other stuff that we've got to do or somebody's going to find us, they're going to struggle with security throughout the lifetime of their system, in my opinion. And then the next part that's very essential is the cultural part. What's your company's stance about these things? What's your company's characteristic? People don't think about that, but companies, through their executive teams and their board of directors, have mission statements, have cultures. And if you're wondering what your company's culture are, go to visit a conference room. Look at the slogans and stuff that they have up on the wall. Those are the things that define you as an organization or what you aspire to. And to the extent that you can align your security program to meeting those requirements will basically give you a lot of opportunities for success. Your board and your executive team is already on record as supporting those as the initiative. They're saying that's who we are. We're an ethical company. We're a safe place to work. We care about our community. And to the extent that you focus on initiatives that support those initiatives, they're already pre-approved. You'll get a lot more further success in terms of getting your funding and such, just as a helpful pro tip. But those are also things that you have to include in your must-haves. They're the organizational values. They're things that maybe you're members of trade organizations, internal policies and governance that you've already got in place. Those things need to get filtered into your security requirements for your process automation system. It's not like that your process automation system can just be a Wild West kind of environment, something where you're able to set your own tones, and after all, where the rubber meets the road and nobody can really tell us what to do. Not so. You're part of an organization that has values that you have to capture as your security requirements. Other things that obviously will be helpful with your security requirements are things like industry standards. And again, I like ISA as 62443. I've been involved with it for a while. I think it's the way to go. It says one of my colleagues used to say, "It's the best there is till the best gets here." And it's certainly is deserving of your attention. And lots of other requirements for other industries, particularly like the NIST 882, reflect directly upon the architecture and the thinking that went into ISA 99. ISA 99 or 62403 is much larger. It has much more moving parts than, it's a superset of all of these documents, and it's admittedly a work in progress, but it's a place that you probably ought to start. Another thing that's got going for it is this IEC part of it. They stopped in the process of making the standard and actually aligned it so it would be globally available and globally accessible to anyone that wants to use its standard. There are a number of hardening guidelines that I'd also call your attention to, beginning with the IT hardening guidelines for your site. It's some measure the security requirements for your process automation system usually fall under at least the thinking of the site policy of the folks that are setting the IT policies. And they've already got some standards, they've already got some practices in place that you can readily use to be able to align to. And ultimately, as the owner of the system, your site or your company or your enterprise is actually dictating to some extent what that policy is, as opposed to a trade organization or ISA or some other body. There's also a number of hardening guidelines, and the one I mentioned here is the Center for Internet Security, but there's a number of others. Many of the practitioners like the STIG guidelines that have been published, which are basically security technical implementation guidelines. Also, I'm told, I've never used it, don't have any actual miles, but I understand that Microsoft has a security configuration toolkit that's pretty good. It's obviously tuned to IT rather than OT, but it may be a good starting place as to how you might think about the hardening that you want to accomplish. And those things are going to be pretty much critical. Again, the people that are succeeding, the people that are making progress in changing their security stance in this area are those that are taking ownership of these things and not just taking whatever the vendor ships them. And we'll get to that a little more later. And pretty much immediately, start thinking about the vendor considerations. If you haven't already accepted this, I'm going to tell my opinion is that these process automation systems are co-managed. You may say, no, I pay good money for that. I wrote a check for that system. It's mine. I can do with it as I please. Only to an extent. If you expect it to behave the way the vendor designed it to behave, you're going to have to run it into configurations that they support. If you buy a Pi system, for instance, and I'm not picking on OSI soft now, but you go out and purchase Pi, you can run it on the cloud, you can run it on Blade servers, you can run it on a PC. You can run it in any kinds of different environments. You can, if you want to use a storage area network, knock yourself out. Because OSI is not not made a stipulation as our system only works in this supported configuration, or at least hasn't pushed it very hard. They're very flexible there. If you buy a system from a big DCS vendor, you're in fact agreeing to operate that system the way that they've configured it, or within their configuration guidelines, if you expect it to behave the way that they designed it to. If you decide to deviate that, you decide, no, the storage area networks are the way to go, I'm going to get rid of all my hard disks, you might have some unexpected or unintended results as a result of that. And so you have to recognize that anything that you do or plan to do with your system has to be done with at least some cooperation with the vendor, because in truth, you co-manage these systems. For vendors also should have a shared enlightened self-interest that's motivated by the possibility of the second bullet here, this little motivational speech. It's presented to me as it's the shortest motivational speech in the history of mankind. I am actively seeking your replacement. Now, if you're willing, if you have the courage to be able to do that, you have the means and the courage to do that, and to look a vendor in the eye and say that and mean it, this can be a powerful motivation for them to get some of this enlightened self-interest and remember and realize that helping you to achieve your security goals is in their interest as well. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. Given that you're co-managing these things, you have to get a set of security requirements that you can both live with. It's good to have proactive discussions. If you're at the 101 stage, or you're still trying to get out of the ad hoc stage into a documented stage, you shouldn't wait until you have all your documentation in place to begin talking to the vendors that you use. You should talk to them early and often. You can determine what their security capabilities are and how they can help you to be able to choose these things. I mean, it may be that there's some things that you would like to do in terms of hardening your process automation system that they already do for other clients, and you just haven't asked for it yet. There's lots of benefits of being able to take the most knowledgeable people about their system and include them in discussions with the most knowledgeable people about your enterprise and your process and what you can achieve in terms of security requirements. In considering the user maturity, there's an importance to do this kind of crown jewel analysis. What are you really protecting? Are you just trying to meet some kind of a metric? Is it, they just told you that password management was a good idea and I need to get me some of that? Or how is this initiative, this thing that you're trying to do, is actually going to help you to achieve the security requirements that you're trying to achieve? And those security requirements are, again, called back to the things that you have to do to stay in business, and the things that you want to do, the things that characterize you as an enterprise, as a culture. And putting and blending all these things together and then looking at what it is that you're really trying to protect. Are you just trying to, do you want a patch because you like a score above 95 to see that all your patches have been implemented? Or do you really like what those patches are doing for you. The fact that you're displacing known software flaws when you apply patches. What is it that you're trying to achieve by patching? You just don't want people to yell at you, or is there something that you're trying to accomplish? And to think about how that reflects and how that amplifies your attempt to do the things that are essential to your enterprise, to your site, to your system, to your process. Doing a vulnerability assessments on your OT systems, whether they're safety systems or they're ICS or they're SCADA systems or standalone PLCs or a system of systems that you put together to accomplish your goal. Those things, that's a good idea. Those help to determine what your user requirements are, is to see where you're deficient or where it's considered deficient by a third party to be able to come in and do a good assessment on your system. Think about, if you will, and this engage, this is not pleasant to think about. Well, what's the worst day for your plant? If you're operating a chemical incinerator, what's the worst thing that could happen there? Aside from the smoldering crater or the column of flame that you can see from orbit, think about one click to the left of that, to the left of boom. What's the worst day for your plant? All right, start making a list of those things. You start thinking about, well, if we lost this server, and we couldn't get it back soon, well, we'd have to stop all this. We'd have to ship our stuff off-site, or we'd have to buy from our competitors to be able to fulfill our orders. That's telling you what you're really trying to protect, and those are the essential security requirements that you want to capture going forward. Again, we're mentioning that we've got a reference architecture, and as the user maturity develops, it's going to have documentation around its various domains that it requires to be able to operate. This last term I like Joe likes resilience, and I like that too, but I also like this idea of fitness for use. Fitness for use is something that we understand as engineers, and we've accepted as part of our safety culture. And to get to your security requirements at that place, basically saying, the guy wants to come on site, he wants to work on a particular system. Well, he's got to have safety training, he's got to have PPE, he's got to have a certain amount of escort and oversight of his work. He's got to have tools that we approve of to be able to work on our equipment. Those things are all fitness for use requirements, and they apply to the security domains as well. And to begin to think about security is not something that you're trying to tag on and add on and put in at the last minute, but rather put in as a basic requirement. So that someone to get onto your site has already got to be this tall to ride. And you're establishing those as a fitness for use criteria that we already do for our process designs, our implementation designs, and our safety culture. And the acceptance testing, acceptance testing is kind of interesting. One of my former colleagues used to say, we're really paying to do what the vendor has to do anyway. They got to QC their system before they ship it to you. So we send a bunch of people on site to exercise all the points and make sure that all the functions in the system work. Well, they have to do that whether you go on site with them or not. And that's kind of an interesting anomaly. And there's a lot of good reasons for continuing to do the acceptance site. But if you're buying the N+1 version of the same system from the same vendor, this might not be money all that well spent. That editorial, that no extra charge for that rant. But in that, favors the prepared. I'm convinced of this. That if you're going to go on site, that you still don't take the vanilla cookie cutter version of the acceptance test, but you build your functionality into it. You build your expectations, your functionality into the acceptance test, so you're accepting more than just a generic version of their system or a specific configuration of their system, but one that has the functionality that you want to preserve. The vendor, some caveats here, is the vendor is very likely to consider the system their property until it ships to you. And what that means is that they may not allow you to come on site to do security testing. Many vendors may not install the security features in this system until the last minute. And they don't want you to come on site and test security until they're good and ready for it. And it may literally be the week that it ships that it's going to be doing, and you might want to test the system weeks before that. And since it's their system, and I know I can tell you there was an instance in which one of our clients actually purchased a system, and they said, we purchased the system, we can test it any time that we want. And the vendor pushed back mightily. They basically said, you absolutely positively will not do an acceptance test, or a security acceptance test on our system while it's at our factory because of this just-in-time nature, secondly. And thirdly, who are you going to bring to do this? If you're going to bring in a third party to do this, they aren't covered by the NDA, and we don't want our secrets known by anybody other than us and those that we have to tell you. So the vendor can give quite a bit of pushback in this. Not the least of which is this idea is who's going to pay for the extra work that the security features are going to generate. There's extra requirements on their part. There's extra requirements on your part. This adds to the length of the acceptance testing that you do, whether you do it on site or you do it at their site or yours. That doing this testing is often difficult to add in later. If you don't ask for it early and get it built into the contract, you may not be able to achieve it at all. You may not have an option of doing anything but the generic cookie cutter acceptance test that they do for everybody. The scoping and staffing is ultimately going to become critical because you've got to have the right people there, and they have to have the right people there to be able to assist in troubleshooting and just getting all the staffing together at the right place is always a challenge with any project. So favoring the prepared, having done some preparations, what kind of things could you expect to test at a factory acceptance test? Well, one thing, it might be tempting to try to do a full vulnerability scan. Like the system was on your site, you bring in a third party or bring in your red team folks to be able, or blue team folks to be able to do a vulnerability assessment to the system while it's in the factory. Well, that's kind of like the real thing. And that's a pretty good opportunity to see what the security posture of the system is at that point. But determining the methodology, is it going to be an active vulnerability scan? You're going to use an SSR tool like that to introduce traffic into their network. And the network probably is set up for you to be able to test it with suitably isolated from the vendor's network, but they're going to want to make absolutely sure that that's the case if you're trying to do this. Scheduling the additional time in to accomplish this, and most of the cybersecurity vendors will tell you it takes a week or so to do a vulnerability assessment. Not vendors, the cybersecurity consultants will tell you it takes about a week or so to do the vulnerability assessment, but then it takes several other weeks to be able to put together the report and to digest what the findings are. Can your schedule take that kind of an impact? Typically, the process control system is like the last thing that gets installed in the plant, and all the flexibility has already been soaked up. All the padding that was been put into the project schedule has already been used up by the time you get to the process control system. The automation system ships, they want to install it and start checking it out immediately. As soon as they can finish turning all the screws, they want to start the checkout. Are you willing to incur a possible delay in the checkout for the remediation for the things that you find from your vulnerability assessment? Those are the kind of things that you need to consider, as well as the contract and disclosure agreements for the consultants you plan to use. Doing very specific assessments, you might be certain domains that you want. You want to align it and then check that it meets your reference architecture, for instance. You may want to test specific things about its change management or backup features or other things that you want to check. Requesting a full network capture that is setting up a span port somewhere inside of the system that's being tested and doing a full network capture for the whole system acceptance test is not an unreasonable thing to ask for. And you can basically bring a hard drive, capture all that data while you're doing the acceptance test and take it back to your plant and turn it over to your blue team to take a look at it and see what they think about it. And that's not a hard ask, and it's not a whole lot of work. But it's something that's achievable, but you've got to ask for it up front. You can't show up at the acceptance test with a hard drive and say, guess what I want to do? That's probably not going to go very far. And you're probably not going to get a lot of cooperation from your vendor. Chances are, if you tell them that you're going to do a full network capture for security analysis, they'll probably make sure that those security features are installed before you arrive. And so that's a benefit to everybody. Basically, again, we're aligning to the criteria that you want to try to hit. You're not just trying to test everything under the sun. You want to test the things that are most important to you. Those are the things, after we get the most important things done, then we get to the nice to haves and the goodies and things like that. But particularly if there's identity management is something that's critical for your site, or you're trying to align to certain identity management behaviors, you want to see how those get exercised. You want to see those get exercised and see how those are accomplished inside of your factory acceptance test. Determining and doing it at the factory or the site, your place of mind, that's a constant question. They both have benefits. Obviously, if there's problems at the vendor's site that need remediation, they've got access to their teams and their resources to be able to accomplish those. And perhaps overnight, while you're grabbing a bite to eat and sleeping at the hotel, they might have bringing the staff in to work on the things that were discovered the day before. Likewise, if you do it at your place, you have more access to your goodies. And the idea that the delays, the things that you discover from security testing may impact the vendor's ship set site. But if it's done at your site, then it may, and things are discovered, then it may impact the availability of the system for checkout and the availability of the system for operation while you wait on those remediations. So there's checks and balances there. Maybe even there's an advantage to doing kind of a combination where you do the first part of it at the factory acceptance test and you test the remediations when it gets on site. Maybe there's something cooperative. But again, you've got to ask for it up front. None of it comes automatically shipped in the box. You've got to design your testing and acceptance program to include what's the security core requirement, touching the bases and the metrics that you're looking for up front. And the earlier you ask for it, the better off you are. Which, again, kind of an anecdote. I think I've got a little time to share this. I got lathered up, set the Wayback Machine for about 12 years ago. And I got pretty excited about this procurement language project that came out of DHS. The idea, here's some standardized boilerplate sort of languages you can put into your purchasing requirements to help you to be able to ask for the security that you want. And I got pretty excited about that, decided I was going to champion that for my company. I was going to get on the ground level. I went back and started trying to implement that with some of the projects that I was involved in. And I picked what I thought was a pretty good ally and a project that I had in flight. And I talked to the division rep about what it is that I wanted to do and the SCADA people. And more security wouldn't be bad. We don't mind that. What do you have in mind? So I went back and kind of crafted up some language that we can insert in the document. And when they saw those, they basically said, wait a minute. I might not be able to buy my favorite vendor if we put this in there. There's no way I'm going to put that into my request for quotation. My guys will get excluded because I know that they don't do that. And I said, but if you don't ask for it, you're never going to get it. I said, eventually they will. Eventually, if it's really important, all the vendors are going to do it. I don't have to worry about that. So really, I kind of got a bucket of cold water thrown on me. The purchasing departments were even less kind. Basically, they immediately said, well, this will need some legal review, which is basically the pointer into the abyss. So, I mean, that's... your mileage, no matter how your enthusiasm and no matter what the posture that you think you might have, you might not be able to champion this on your own. You're probably going to have to take a village to be able to accomplish some changes in your procurement language, but they pay off because vendors do stuff for money. That's what they do. And if you ask for things, if you ask for what it is that you want, you're very much more likely to get it than it just showing up accidentally or because somebody else asked for it. No extra charge for that rant either. Having determined this and getting an idea, what sort of things could you check on some of these domains? I'm just listing a few here, some that I think are achievable. And again, these are assuming that they're going to be important to your enterprise, your site. In the accounts, you want to look at the way the accounts are managed. You want to ensure that non-privileged accounts can't get privileged kind of activities. You want to ensure that if your vendor is providing a custom replacement for you, maybe you've got SCADA system version 5 and you've put off upgrading for a long time and you're getting a fresh new copy of SCADA system version 9. I'm just making the numbers up here, so just go with me. And they're responsible for translating all the software and rewriting all the software from the old version to the new version. Well, you want to make sure that the user accounts can use their customized software. You want to exercise those there. You don't want to get to your site and say, oh man, you got to have an admin account to be able to run this app that the vendor designed for you. It didn't used to have to be that way. You don't want to get that surprise when you get it on site. And you don't want to give admin credits to anybody that doesn't have to have them. Now, that's a change maybe from where you rolled at version 3 or version 5, but that's something that's going to be pretty important to any security program, is to limit the restrictions or, the role-based is a rule that role-based accounts or role-based privileges or a least privileged model, if you like reading the computer science documentation. But those kind of things are going to be pretty important to you, and you also want to see the management system. You want to add and delete and test accounts while you're there. Looking at network traffic, again, we mentioned getting a full network capture is very valuable, but it's also good to kind of sniff on the network while you're there to take a look at it and identify things that are trying to get in and out of these, the control system that's being tested to external IP addresses. For instance, if it's asking Colorado Canberra what time it is, you don't really want that. You want it to use the timekeeper that you've already got set up for your process operations in your plant. This is a minor thing. I don't know of any specific exploit that goes after the NTP protocols or NTP services, but it's a hole that's opened up that you don't want to have open up. If your system is asking Amsterdam for updates, you probably want to get that fixed early and often. You don't want to do that, unless you live in Amsterdam, of course, that's perfectly all right. But even then, you shouldn't want to be going to Microsoft to get your patches. You probably want to get them internally. And that kind of traffic in and out of your process automation system that goes out of the automation system into the enterprise is worth some scrutiny. But if it's going outside of your company, that's something you got to know about. And the earlier you know about that and can remediate it, the better off you are. Doing backups. I like this idea too of being able to take the time in your factory acceptance test to do a bare metal restore. Okay, let's demonstrate how the backup system works, and then let's test it. Let's pull the hard drive out of the node that I backed up, and let's pop a new one in and see what the difficulty and how close we get and when we do the restore process. This is an ideal time to be able to test this, as opposed to some late afternoon, some Friday afternoon on a long day, on a 3-day weekend in which you get a hard drive failure at your plant. So security-wise, it's not really a security issue so much as it is a resilience issue that reflects off or has security components. But it's a good time to test it while it's at the factory. Another thing to check that is good to check is the software update process of seeing what the operating system updates are, seeing what the controller updates are, the hotfix updates are, the AV engine and signature updates, how do those perform, and actually see those exercised in the system and gauge their impact, gauge the procedure, make sure that you understand it. The new hotness for a lot of the things at the controller level, the level 1, are signed updates, things that actually have an update that you can verify came from a particular source and is, that the contents are good. Well, how does that actually work? Particularly if your technicians aren't used to dealing with installing a certificate on the device that's supposed to do the update, or aren't familiar with the security checks required to use a signed update and to verify it, that's something that you want to test and build knowledge of while you're at the factory. Considering not only with the authentication, not only the hotfix procedure, but what kind of authentications are actually being employed there, and what you're going to have to maintain. If that means that you're going to have to get an annual certificate update or a major version certificate update as you go from version to version of the software that you're running on the vendor system, you need to know what that process is. The remote access for vendors is something that's also something that you want to test while you're there, and you may have to go through and have to set up some equipment to show you there's a system that is verifiably outside of the network that they're kind of remote in, so you can actually see it exercised. And they may not be able to do that, particularly if you're providing all the firewalls and you're providing a jump box that the vendor is going to land on, and a jump box in the DMZ, which is a fine security practice, by the way. You may be limited as to how much of that testing there, but you could at least see some of the basic functionality and put it on the punch list to test when the system is actually on site before you let the vendors off site. Obviously, two-factor authentication is a recommendation. And if you can bring the tokens and you can bring the certificates and such to be able to test that at the factory, then your system, that's one less thing that you'll have to do when they ship it to you. Another thing that you might want to consider, and not might want, that you absolutely should consider, is what about the invisible network devices? Now, I don't mean the shadow IT here. I mean the switches and various network devices that are configured as part of the system. That it's just where everything's hooked up. It's nothing to worry about. There's no security components in it, but not so. Those things that we see typically get little to no TLC over their life cycle. Basically, people run them until they rust. And the fact that they came in 1999 or 2009 with a particular switch configuration, a particular OS version, and 2019 is probably exactly the same version that it was shipped in. Very few sites, very few end users think to be able to do the OS upgrades to these switches. And you want to test that procedure. You want to find out what their policy is and how the procedure works, what kind of outage it is induced. Does it mean that I have to take the whole network down, or can I take the A network and upgrade it while I've switched over to the B network and then upgrade the B network? You want to get familiar with that while it's at the factory. And if it doesn't work as advertised, then that's where you get the factory people in and explain why. Explain what went wrong with it and what you have to do with it to be able to fix it. Passwords. My opinion is that you should not accept default passwords on your system. There's no reason for everybody on the East Coast to know the passwords on your system. There's no reason for anybody outside of your plant or the immediate circle of people who support your system to know the passwords. And so ensuring that all of the default passwords are changed from the vendor. I know that it may be part of your service contract, but this is some of that co-ownership thing again. Again, you agreed that they need a service account, but you ought to agree on a cadence for being able to change a password so that you've got assurance that it's not being abused. Now, changing the password won't prevent abuse in every single case, but it will prevent the common knowledge, and particularly from the guys who rotate between jobs, the guys that's on your vendor technician team who used to call in and support your plant. Well, guess what? They're now overseas working for another contractor, but they've got knowledge about your security. They've got knowledge about the passwords that are necessary to be able to put a new firmware update in your PLCs if they're given the opportunity, and you really would prefer for them not to have that. You can't brainwash them. You can't change, extract that knowledge from their minds. But by periodically changing the password because you've taken ownerships of them, allows you to much better control over your configurations and your potential risk. Obviously, even and especially for vendor accounts and the service accounts that are required within the system. Service accounts you may not know about. They're the accounts that software uses to run or the executives use to be able to invoke another task and get it to run with appropriate privileges. Again, those systems are oftentimes have hard-coded passwords that aren't simple to change, admittedly, but having taken control of them, you can also prevent abuse by those systems as well. It's nice to be able to go into those service accounts and ensure that they're non-interactive, that you can't log in with the service account. It's great that you can run a task with the service account, but it should resist being used for login. Can we get a mic up for a question, or do you want to wait until I'm headed to the home stretch? You want to wait till the end? He's waving off. Okay. And I said, well, we're at the home stretch. So we've got a mic here available to you. So let's field the question. We got some time, and I got another question that arose in the back there. I deliberately built time into the schedule because not everybody's going to agree with what I said, and then part of why we're here is to learn from each other, and I want to hear from you. Don't be shy. Sir.
Okay. It was just a comment when you're talking about passwords. As of January 2020, that is now a requirement, is it not, based on the ruling through California? So vendors now, when we place those out there, you can no longer have default. You're in violation if you do.
Okay, and that's again back to our localities and in terms of the requirements, depending on your state you're in. You know, the state that many of us, the state that you're from the state of Tennessee, where I live, says we don't need no stinking passwords. So it's, they don't have a requirement like that. But if you're going to operate in a place that does have that requirement, it's essential that you know that and build that into your process. Good call.
All right, we got a question from the back here.
Hey, Mark, part of what you described sounds more like a gray box pen test. Could you comment and contrast the vulnerability assessment you described versus pen testing?
Well, and again, your vendor's appetite for performing a vulnerability assessment on their system is going to vary vendor to vendor, from absolutely not to maybe with our supervision, or we'll let you test this set of things. And getting a test, for instance, maybe all you can do is just take a laptop there with Nmap on it and do a full 65,000 port sweep on TCP and UDP as part of the acceptance test. That may be all that you can get. And like you said, it's kind of a negotiated settlement, so it's not a live red teaming or anything like that. It's a settlement. It's a discussion. It's a cooperative effort. Much like the pen test or the cybersecurity vulnerability assessment is going to be if you engaged a third-party vendor. If you engaged some cybersecurity, ICS cybersecurity shop to come in and do a vulnerability acceptance test at your site, that's not a come on in and do your worst kind of thing. You sit down and you determine the bounds of your operation. You give a fixed set of time. You get if it is a penetration test, you're going to have specific targets that you're looking for, like screenshots of login screens, for instance. So that I was able to get this far into the system and had the opportunity to log on if I had pirated credits. So there are specific things that you would be able to look for, and you and your vendor kind of have to work that out depending, again, on your requirements. Okay, fate favors a repair, doing homework, there's no replacement for it. And so asking for the things that are essential to you gives it a much better place to leverage and get value out of that. Does that make sense? It is gray box. It's not a ollie income free, do your worst. And almost no vendor is going to allow you to do that, even on their site, in my estimation. I've not asked or bid one very much. Got another question here.
Yeah, well, I'm bringing the mic up. I had a quick question for you too, Mark. So,
Do you get any questions?
what's that? I'm allowed to do
Do
this?
you get any questions? Really? Okay.
So one of the things that I've observed coming in doing security acceptance tests at, either at the factory or at the site, when you're not starting with those requirements, like sometimes you come in and those requirements haven't been set up front. How do you prioritize what you're looking for, in that security acceptance test? Or do you have some hot tips on that?
If you're at the 101 section, if you're really at ad hoc, you're just getting really started, you don't have a very much documentation developed and haven't really thought about your security maturity in the domains that I mentioned earlier, you're probably going to have to basically ask them what they can provide for security testing and start with that.
Yeah.
Or there's maybe high nails. Maybe you guys were, at your particular site, you were the victims of a breach. Not at your process automation system, but at some other system. Maybe they attacked your engineering network and stole some intellectual property. And your board of directors says all systems will be resistant to this kind of activity. And that's kind of an unfunded initiative that board of directors are often likely to be able to issue. And under that particular case, that gives you the priority for how can I protect my plant's intellectual property that's inside of my ICS? Your schemes, your graphics, your control configurations, those things that reflect your secret sauce and how it is that you do what you do. How can I protect those? And those would get the priority. Does that make sense? So you got to align that. It's never static. Every single, as you go through this iteratively, you will get better and better at your security requirements testing, as will your vendor. Yes, sir.
Hello, Mark. What do you recommend to the customer if you catch on the assessment some vulnerability on equipment on a level 1 of per the model, like a PLC or this one, that they have the critical vulnerability, that's but the vendor to take a lot of months or years to get the patch for that. What do you recommend to the customer in this case?
That's a hard problem. And your likelihood, particularly if it's a recently published vulnerability, your likelihood of getting some satisfaction, maybe even be able to work with the vendor to come up with a solution, again, cooperatively, we co-own the system, right? And it's our interest to get this patch available and tested. Maybe you could even use your system to be able to, as a test bed for that, if they've got a patch that says it's up and ready. But if it's years in development, it's basically, it's broken, we don't know how to fix it. I don't know very much that you can do in terms of getting the fix in other than putting in other layers of protection. That may argue you to put an additional segmentation in particular controllers on a specific network that just has controllers on it. They're not peers with the HMIs, but they've got a specific level 1 control segment with firewall that's in it protecting it. And basically saying that this firewall I'm going to start with the default deny and I'm only going to allow Modbus traffic. Or I'm going to block Modbus writes, or I'm going to put very specific traffic to put protections in for a known vulnerable piece of equipment. That's Dale's catchphrase, insecure by design. When you discover that, that's not say, oh man, what am I going to do? What you do is you start working with your vendor to develop mitigations to make that aperture, make that surface area as small as possible. Not that you can eliminate it. Well, sometimes maybe we can. Maybe we can get a good enough fix that just virtually eliminates the vulnerability. But to make the attack surface, the aperture through which the adversary has to come, as small and as difficult as possible.
We have time for probably one more quick question, if there's one out there. Okay, if not, please join me in thanking Mark.
Thank you.